Hey guys, tonight we begin with something glittering and golden, at least from a distance. We're stepping into 1920s Harlem, that legendary neighborhood where jazz was born, where poets found their voices, and where Black Americans built something extraordinary out of almost nothing. You've seen the photographs, heard the music, imagined yourself dancing at the Cotton Club while Duke Ellington plays. But here's the thing. The Harlem you've been sold is a beautiful lie wrapped in saxophone riffs and sepia tones. The truth is grittier, harder, and far more complicated. You probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a Harlem tenement sometime around 1925. The good news is you're alive, and you're in the most vibrant Black community in America. The bad news is you're sharing a 2-room apartment with 7 other people, and someone's elbow is currently pressed against your face. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a mattress on the floor, or maybe just a pallet of blankets wedged into whatever corner wasn't already claimed. The concept of personal space doesn't exist here, not because people don't want it, but because landlords have figured out they can charge 3 times the rent to Black families desperate for housing in a city that doesn't want them anywhere else. You blink awake to the sound of the elevated train rattling past your window, shaking the walls like a small earthquake every 15 minutes. The glass panes vibrate in their frames. Dust falls from the ceiling in tiny clouds. You've learned to sleep through it, mostly, the way soldiers learn to sleep through artillery. The room smells of bodies and yesterday's cooking, and the particular mustiness of plaster that's been wet too many times. There's no ventilation to speak of, just one window that faces a brick wall 3 feet away, letting in approximately no fresh air and all of your neighbor's cigarette smoke. The building itself is a monument to neglect. Built decades ago for white families who've long since fled to better neighborhoods, it was never meant to house this many people. The stairs sag in the middle where thousands of feet have worn them down. The hallways are dark because the landlord won't replace burned-out bulbs, and the walls are covered in a greasy film that never seems to wash off no matter how hard the women scrub. Paint peels in long, curling strips, revealing layers of older colors beneath, a geological record of the building's slow decay. The banister wobbles dangerously, and everyone knows to grip it lightly, if at all. Children have fallen. Old folks have tumbled. Nobody sues because who has money for lawyers, and what would be the point anyway? You try to sit up without disturbing the person next to you, probably a cousin who arrived last month from Georgia, still looking for work, still sleeping on your floor, because where else would they go? The Great Migration is in full swing, and every week another relative or friend of a friend shows up at your door with a cardboard suitcase and eyes full of hope that New York will be different from the South they fled. And it is different. There are no lynch mobs here, no sharecropper contracts that keep you perpetually in debt, no white men who can murder you for looking at them wrong without facing any consequence at all. But different doesn't mean easy. Different just means the violence wears a different face. You swing your feet onto the floor and immediately regret it because the linoleum is peeling and cold even in summer, and in winter it feels like standing on a frozen pond. The toilet is down the hall, shared with 4 other families. There's always a line in the morning, and the smell drifting from that direction suggests someone had a rough night. You grab your robe, if you have one, and join the queue, nodding to Mrs. Patterson from 4B, who's been waiting so long she's nearly fallen back asleep standing up. Mr. Williams from 4D is ahead of her, shifting from foot to foot with increasing urgency, muttering under his breath about the injustice of shared facilities. His wife died last winter from pneumonia, and he's been slowly unraveling ever since, talking to himself more than to others, forgetting to eat unless someone reminds him. The community watches out for him because that's what you do here, but watching out only goes so far when everyone's barely surviving themselves. The bathroom itself is a marvel of urban decay. The toilet runs constantly, a thin stream of water that adds to the building's already precarious plumbing. The sink has one working faucet that produces a trickle of rust-colored water, and you've learned to let it run for a full minute before splashing any on your face. The tub, well, nobody uses the tub anymore, not since something started growing in it that no amount of scrubbing could remove. A dark greenish stain that seems to spread a little more each month. The mirror above the sink is cracked diagonally, giving you two slightly offset reflections every time you look at yourself. You do your business quickly, wash your hands and face with water so cold it makes your teeth ache, and head back to start another day. Breakfast is whatever's available. Maybe some cornbread left over from last night, slightly stale but still edible if you warm it over the stove. Maybe a cup of coffee stretched so thin it's basically brown water with ambition. Sugar is expensive, milk spoils fast without reliable refrigeration, and fresh fruit is a luxury you can't afford most weeks. You eat, standing up because there aren't enough chairs, and you eat fast because you've got to get to work, assuming you have work today, which is never guaranteed. The icebox in the corner holds whatever's left from the weekend, which isn't much. A small block of ice melts slowly in the upper compartment, dripping into a pan that someone forgot to empty again. The whole contraption sweats in summer and barely keeps things cold enough to matter. You've gotten creative with beans, with rice, with the cheapest cuts of meat the butcher is willing to sell. Pig's feet, ham hocks, chitlins, neck bones, all the parts white folks threw away until black cooks transformed them into something worth eating. Your grandmother would recognize the recipes, handed down from slavery times when making something from nothing wasn't a choice but a survival skill. Necessity is the mother of cuisine, and Harlem kitchens are nothing if not necessary. The women in this building could write cookbooks that would put fancy restaurants to shame, coaxing flavor from ingredients that cost pennies, stretching a single chicken into 3 meals through sheer determination and ancestral knowledge. So you've survived the morning routine in your crumbling tenement. Now let's talk about getting to work, assuming you're lucky enough to have a job. And luck is exactly what it takes, because Harlem in the 1920s is teeming with people who migrated north, chasing factory jobs that mostly don't exist for them anymore. The war is over. White soldiers came home wanting their positions back, and suddenly those employment opportunities that beckon black Southerners northward have mysteriously evaporated. Signs that once read "Colored Help Wanted" have been replaced with "No colored need apply," or nothing at all, just closed doors and averted eyes. You're competing with thousands of other hopeful souls for whatever scraps the economy tosses your way. If you're a man, you might work as a porter, a janitor, an elevator operator. You might load trucks at the docks, or haul garbage, or do any of the 100 jobs white New Yorkers consider beneath them. The work is backbreaking, and the pay is insulting, but it's work, and work means survival. If you're a woman, you're probably doing domestic work, cleaning houses in white neighborhoods, scrubbing floors and washing dishes for families who won't let you use their bathroom because they're afraid you'll somehow contaminate it. You ride the subway downtown before dawn, arriving at back doors in neighborhoods where you'd be questioned by police if you walk down the sidewalk after dark. The mistress of the house inspects your work with suspicious eyes, runs her finger along mantles looking for dust, checks the corners for signs of laziness. She calls you by your first name while expecting you to call her mom. She pays you $3 a week if you're lucky, $5 if you're exceptional, and docks your wages for any infraction real or imagined. You smile and nod and say, "Yes, ma'am," because the alternative is no work at all. And no work means eviction, means hunger, means your children going without. You take the subway downtown, packed into cars with workers of every shade, though somehow the black passengers always seem to end up standing. The train smells of sweat and newsprint, and the particular exhaustion of people who work too hard for too little. Bodies press against you from all sides, strangers forced into intimacy by the crush of morning commute. You emerge into Manhattan and walk to your job, past storefronts that don't want your business, past restaurants where you couldn't eat even if you had the money, past a city that tolerates your labor but not your presence. White pedestrians don't make way for you on the sidewalk. You're the one who steps aside, who shrinks yourself smaller, who navigates around people who act as if you're invisible until you accidentally brush against them, at which point you become very visible. Indeed, the work itself is grueling. Let's say you're one of the fortunate ones with a steady position, maybe working in a hotel or a private club. You're on your feet for 10, 12, 14 hours. You smile when you don't feel like smiling. You say, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Mom," until the words lose all meaning, until they become reflexive sounds rather than actual responses. You're invisible when it's convenient and hypervisible when something goes wrong. A guest's watch goes missing, and suddenly everyone's looking at you, the help, as if theft were coded into your DNA. The manager pulls you aside, asks questions that aren't really questions, searches your pockets with rough hands while other employees watch. They find nothing because you took nothing, but the suspicion clings to you anyway, an invisible stain that never quite washes out. You keep your head down and do your job and try not to think about the fact that you're better educated than half the people you're serving, that you can quote Shakespeare and solve equations they'd never attempt. But none of that matters because your skin determines your station, and your station is the service entrance. The pay is barely enough to cover rent, which is already 2 weeks overdue because your landlord raised it again. And what choice do you have? You can't move to a white neighborhood. They won't rent to you. Real estate agents practice something called blockbusting, scaring white families with threats of black neighbors, then buying their properties cheap and selling them dear to black families desperate for housing. You can't find cheaper housing in Harlem because every landlord knows they've got a captive market and prices accordingly. Some folks are paying twice what white families pay for half the space in buildings twice as decrepit. It's extortion with a smile, and everyone knows it. But knowing doesn't change anything. The rent is due regardless of fairness, and the eviction notice doesn't care about justice. After work, you take the train back uptown, joining the tide of exhausted bodies flowing back to Harlem. The sun is setting behind the buildings, painting the sky orange and pink, and for a moment, the neighborhood looks almost beautiful. You pass the churches and the beauty parlors, the numbers runners on the corners trying to catch your eye with knowing glances, the street vendors selling hot dogs and pretzels and dreams of a better tomorrow. The smell of frying food mingles with exhaust fumes and garbage and the particular urban perfume of too many people packed too close together. You pass the storefront where Marcus Garvey's followers gather, talking about black nationalism and returning to Africa, about dignity and self-determination in a world that offers neither. Their uniforms are impressive, military style with gold braid, and their certainty is almost contagious, the belief that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where black folks can simply be. You pass the corner where old Mr. Johnson plays his guitar and sings blues so sad they make your chest hurt. Songs about Mississippi and lost love and the endless weight of being black in America. His voice is rough and beautiful, weathered by decades of life that hasn't been kind, but hasn't broken him either. The music follows you up the block, mixing with the clatter of the L train and the shouts of children playing stickball in the street. This is Harlem in the golden hour. The brief window between work and worry when the neighborhood feels alive with possibility. But let's talk about that legendary nightlife you've heard so much about. The Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, all those famous spots where jazz was supposedly born and everybody danced until dawn. Here's the catch. Most of those clubs don't want you inside. The Cotton Club, that glamorous establishment you've seen in photographs, features black performers for white audiences. The doormen turn away black patrons, while white folks from downtown come uptown to experience what they call exotic entertainment. They sit at tables covered in white linen, sipping illegal champagne, watching black dancers perform routines designed to titillate and shock, jungle themes and primitive fantasies that have nothing to do with anyone's actual life. You might hear Duke Ellington or Cab Calloway from the street outside, the music drifting through closed doors into a neighborhood full of people who created this art form, but aren't allowed to enjoy it in its most famous venue. The irony is thick enough to choke on. You've been relegated to spectator status in your own cultural revolution. If you want to actually participate in Harlem nightlife, you're going to smaller clubs, basement joints, rent parties in people's apartments. The rent party is the real Harlem invention, a brilliant solution to an impossible problem. Your rent is due, you can't pay it, so you throw a party and charge admission. 25 cents at the door, maybe 50 cents for a plate of food, and you dance and drink and laugh until the sun comes up, hoping enough people show to cover what you owe before the landlord comes knocking Monday morning. Someone pushes the furniture against the walls. Someone else brings a piano player or a guitar man. Someone's cousin supplies the liquor, and suddenly your cramped apartment transforms into something magical. The floorboards bounce under dancing feet. The walls sweat with humidity from all those bodies pressed together. Strangers become friends, at least for the night, united by rhythm and the shared understanding that everyone here is just trying to survive. And those parties are genuine. The music is raw and beautiful. Piano players pounding out boogie-woogie rhythms, while the floor shakes and the neighbors complain, and nobody cares, because everyone's trying to forget, for a few hours, how hard tomorrow's going to be. The dancers move with a freedom you don't see in daylight hours. Bodies, uncoiling from the tension of constant vigilance, expressing things that can't be spoken aloud. But don't romanticize it. These parties exist because people are desperate. The joy is real, but it's joy carved out of necessity, pleasure stolen from the jaws of poverty. You dance because if you don't dance, you'll cry, and crying doesn't pay the rent either. The liquor at these parties is probably bathtub gin, prohibition being in full swing, and what you're drinking might make you sick, or blind, or worse, depending on what the bootlegger cut it with. You've heard stories about people going blind from bad hooch, about wood alcohol poisonings, about batches laced with chemicals that'll land you in Harlem hospital if you're lucky, and the morgue if you're not. The stuff burns going down, leaves a chemical aftertaste that no amount of sugar or juice can quite mask. But you drink anyway, because what else are you going to do? Stay sober and think about your problems. You drink and dance and pretend the world outside doesn't exist, at least until morning comes crashing in with all its demands. Now let's talk about something nobody wants to discuss when they romanticize the Harlem Renaissance. The violence. Not the dramatic, headline-grabbing violence of race riots, though that exists too, but the everyday violence of being black in a white city. The police don't protect you. They harass you. Walking home at night, you might get stopped for no reason, patted down against a wall, questioned about where you're going and why. The officer's hands are rough, his voice rougher, and his badge gives him permission to do whatever he wants. The wrong answer, or even the right answer delivered with insufficient deference, can land you in a jail cell or a hospital bed. Officers beat black men with impunity, knowing there's no accountability, no investigation, no justice. They call it tuning up, when they work someone over with nightsticks, a casual phrase for casual brutality. You learn to cross the street when you see a badge coming. You learn to keep your hands visible and your voice soft and your eyes down. You learn survival strategies that white New Yorkers never have to consider. Lessons passed from father to son, mother to daughter, an inheritance of caution that no one asked for, but everyone receives. And it's not just the police. It's the knowledge that you exist outside the protection of the law, that if something happens to you, if you're robbed or assaulted or worse, there's no guarantee anyone will care. You're on your own in ways that are difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived it. White gangs from neighboring areas sometimes venture into Harlem, looking for trouble, knowing the consequences will be minimal. Black men who wander into the wrong neighborhood downtown face beatings or worse. The city is carved into territories, invisible lines you learn to respect if you want to keep breathing. And within Harlem itself, the desperation breeds its own violence. Men fighting over scraps, gambling debts settled with fists or worse, domestic disputes that spill into hallways and stairwells. The race riot of 1900 isn't ancient history to you. People remember. Elders speak of it in hushed tones, the terror of white mobs rampaging through black neighborhoods, the police standing aside or joining in. And smaller incidents happen constantly, flare-ups of racial tension that don't make the papers, but leave bruises and broken bones, and that particular trauma of knowing you're hated for existing. Some nights you hear about someone who got jumped coming home from work, some kid who looked at the wrong person the wrong way and paid for it with blood and broken teeth. The community closes ranks, watches out for each other, shares warnings about which blocks to avoid after dark. This isn't paranoia. This is survival. You navigate the city like someone walking through a minefield, always aware of where you are, who's around, what might happen. That constant vigilance takes a toll. It exhausts you in ways sleep can't fix, wears you down until the weariness lives in your bones like a second skeleton. And yet you keep going, because what choice do you have? This is home now, for better or worse, and you're determined to make something of it. Let's get back to your body for a moment, because your body is staging a quiet rebellion against your living conditions. The tenement you call home is a petri dish for disease. Tuberculosis is rampant, passing from person to person in those overcrowded rooms where everyone breathes the same stale air. They call it consumption. And the name is apt because it consumes everything. The lungs first, then the strength, then the hope. You know someone who died from it, probably multiple someones. Watch them cough their lives away in beds they shared with family members who would likely catch it next. The coughing starts small, almost nothing, just a tickle that won't quite clear. Then it deepens, becomes wet, produces blood-flecked sputum that everyone pretends not to notice. The sick person grows thin, grows pale beneath their dark skin, grows too weak to work, and then too weak to eat, and finally too weak to breathe. The doctors don't come to Harlem often, and when they do, they treat patients with a casual dismissiveness that borders on contempt. Harlem Hospital is overcrowded and underfunded. The staff stretch so thin that waiting times can be measured in days. If something serious happens to you, if you break a bone or develop an infection or have any of the 100 medical emergencies that strike randomly, your odds aren't good. Medicine in the 1920s is crude by modern standards anyway, but medicine for black folks is cruder still. You're an afterthought in a system that wasn't built with you in mind. And it's not just tuberculosis haunting these streets. Pneumonia sweeps through the tenements every winter, picking off the elderly and the young with terrifying efficiency. Influenza still lingers in collective memory. The great pandemic of 1918 having devastated Harlem with particular cruelty just a few years back. You remember it, or you've heard the stories from those who survived. The bodies piling up faster than they could be buried. Entire families wiped out in a matter of days. The morgues overflowing. The churches holding funeral after funeral after funeral. The fear of another outbreak never quite leaves. Every cough, every fever, every child who seems a little too tired carries the weight of that memory. You treat illness with home remedies passed down from grandmothers with mustard plasters and onion poultices, and prayers whispered over steaming bowls of soup. You brew teas from roots and barks. Apply compresses soaked in herbs. Call on the wisdom of elders who learned healing in the South from those who learned it during slavery from those who remembered Africa. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't. But what else can you do when the hospital might turn you away and the doctor charges more than you make in a week? The summer is coming, and with it, a particular kind of misery. Your apartment becomes an oven. Heat building up in the brick and plaster until the rooms are barely habitable. There's no air conditioning, obviously, and your one window provides approximately zero relief. The air sits heavy and motionless, thick with humidity that makes every breath feel like work. You sleep on the fire escape if you can, joining the parade of bodies draped across every available outdoor surface, trying to catch whatever breeze the night offers. The metal grating presses patterns into your skin, but at least it's cooler than inside. Children splash in water from open hydrants while their parents watch from stoops. Everyone just trying to survive until September brings some relief. The smell of the neighborhood in August is something you never forget. Garbage ripening in the heat, sweat from 1,000 bodies, food going bad because iceboxes can't keep up with the temperature. Flies are everywhere, fat and lazy, landing on your food, your skin, your sleeping face. The constant buzzing becomes background noise, just part of summer's soundtrack, along with the shouts and the music, and the L train's endless rattle. And yet people find joy. Stoops become social clubs, where neighbors gather to gossip and commiserate and share whatever meager refreshment they can afford. Block parties spring up spontaneously, someone hauling a piano onto the sidewalk, everyone dancing in the street until the cops come to shut it down. Music pours from every window because suffering doesn't mean you stop living. It just means living takes more effort. Winter brings different problems. Your tenement's heating system, if it functions at all, produces heat so erratically that you never know whether you'll wake up sweating or shivering. The radiators clang and hiss like angry animals, sometimes working, sometimes sitting, cold and useless while you pile on every blanket you own. The wind finds every crack in the walls, every gap around the windows, sneaking in like an uninvited guest determined to steal whatever warmth you've managed to accumulate. You can see your breath indoors some mornings, little clouds that remind you the building doesn't care if you freeze. Coal is expensive, and when the building's supply runs low, the super just shrugs and tells you to complain to the landlord, who lives somewhere downtown and never returns calls. You stuff newspaper into the cracks, wear your coat indoors, sleep in your clothes. The children get sick first, then the old folks, then everyone else. A winter in a Harlem tenement is a war of attrition against the cold, and the cold usually wins a few battles before spring finally offers a truce. But here's where the story gets complicated, because despite everything, despite the poverty and the prejudice and the daily indignities that pile up like snow on a fire, Escape, Harlem in the 1920s, is producing something extraordinary. The writers and poets and musicians who'll define a cultural movement are living in these same tenements, attending these same rent parties, navigating these same impossible conditions. Langston Hughes is wandering these streets, gathering material that'll become some of the most important poetry in American history. He's working odd jobs, just like you, washing dishes, bussing tables, doing whatever it takes to survive while he writes about the beauty and pain of black life in America. Zora Neale Hurston is listening to the stories and the slang, absorbing the rhythms that'll infuse her novels. She's sitting on those same stoops, attending those same church services, filing away every detail of a community that the wider world refuses to see as fully human. The Harlem Renaissance isn't happening in fancy galleries or well-funded institutions. It's happening in cramped apartments and church basements and anywhere else. Black artists can find space to work. This is genius flourishing against all odds. Creativity as resistance, art as survival. You might brush shoulders with these people on the street, might hear them reading at a literary gathering in someone's living room, might not realize until decades later that you witnessed something historic. The barbershops and beauty parlors are where ideas spread as fast as gossip. You sit in the chair waiting for your haircut, and the conversation swirls around you like cigarette smoke. Politics and philosophy, sports and scandal, who's hiring and who's cheating on whom. All of it mixing together in spaces that serve as community centers, debate halls, and therapy offices rolled into one. The barber knows everyone's business because everyone tells him everything while he's got them captive in his chair. He's heard about your troubles at work, your landlord's latest outrage, your cousin's new baby. He dispenses advice along with the haircuts, wisdom, accumulated from years of listening to every voice in the neighborhood. His scissors snip in rhythm with his words, punctuation marks in an endless sermon about life and how to live it. For women, the beauty parlor offers similar refuge, a place to get your hair pressed and your spirit lifted, to share burdens and trade recipes, and remember that you're not alone in this struggle. The smell of hot combs and pomade, the hiss of steam, the intimate act of one woman tending another's hair. These rituals bind the community together in ways that outsiders never understand. The church anchors everything. Sunday morning, the neighborhood transforms as everyone puts on their best clothes and streams toward their chosen congregation. Baptist, Methodist, AME, Pentecostal. The flavors of black Christianity are all represented, and each service is part worship part social event, part affirmation that you matter in a world determined to convince you otherwise. The music in these churches would make angels weep, voices blending in harmonies that carry every emotion, from despair to transcendent joy. The choir rocks and sways, the congregation responds with amens and hallelujahs, and for a few hours the weight lifts. You're not a servant or porter or an invisible presence in someone else's city. You're a child of God, dignified and beloved, and part of a community that stretches back through slavery and forward into a future that has to be better than this, because how could it possibly be worse? The preachers speak of Moses and deliverance, of justice rolling down like waters, of a promised land that waits for those who persevere. And even if you don't quite believe it's coming, the promise is enough to get you through another week. After service, the congregation spill onto the sidewalks, trading greetings and handshakes and invitations to Sunday dinner. The neighborhood transformed briefly into something that almost resembles the promised land everyone came here seeking. Let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers run everything, and everyone plays. It's an illegal lottery operated by men and women who figured out how to build empires in the margins of a society that won't let them succeed legitimately. You pick 3 numbers, bet whatever you can afford to lose, and if your combination matches some published statistic, maybe stock exchange figures or racetrack results, you win at 600 to 1 odds. The chances of winning are minuscule, but the dream of winning that keeps people betting their lunch money, their rent money, their hope. The numbers runners are everywhere, working the streets and the bars and the barbershops, collecting slips and coins from people who'd rather gamble on fortune than accept their fate. They know everyone by name. Remember your usual numbers. Extend credit when times are especially hard. Some of the biggest entrepreneurs in Harlem got their start running numbers, building businesses and political influence from what white society dismisses as mere crime. But is it crime when legitimate paths to success have been systematically blocked? Is it crime when you're just trying to build something in a system designed to keep you with nothing? The numbers also provide jobs, hundreds of them, runners and collectors and bookkeepers and enforcers, an entire underground economy operating in plain sight because the police can be paid to look elsewhere. Madame Stephanie Sinclair, the numbers queen, runs her operation with corporate precision, fighting off Italian mobsters who want a piece of her territory, bribing officials, employing lawyers, living proof that black women can build empires even when every institution insists otherwise. She's fierce and brilliant and utterly unapologetic. A self-made millionaire in an age when black women are supposed to be invisible. You might work for her organization if you're smart and reliable and willing to operate outside the law. The pay is better than honest work offers, and there's something satisfying about succeeding in a game rigged against you, even if success comes with risks the straight world doesn't require. She takes out ads in the local papers, warns the community about police corruption, becomes a folk hero to people who've learned that respectability offers no protection anyway. Let's talk about the children for a moment, because they're everywhere in Harlem, running through streets that serve as their playground, their classroom, their entire world. They play stickball with broomsticks and rubber balls, hopscotch on sidewalks chalked with squares, tag and hide and seek in alleyways that adults avoid after dark. They grow up fast here, learning early which streets are safe and which aren't, how to read a stranger's intentions from across the block, when to run and when to freeze. School is mandatory, but often interrupted, missed when there's work to be done, or younger siblings to watch, or no shoes fit for walking through winter slush. The classrooms are overcrowded, the teachers underpaid and sometimes undertrained, the textbooks outdated hand-me-downs from white schools downtown. But education is valued, treasured even, because everyone knows it's the only ladder out of this life. Mothers who work double shifts still check homework by candlelight. Fathers who can barely read themselves demand that their children learn to write. The dream of a better life passes down through generations, encoded in expectations that no amount of poverty can extinguish. You head home as the night settles over Harlem, the streetlights casting pools of yellow light on sidewalks still busy with people. Someone's playing piano through an open window, something slow and melancholy, and you stop for a moment to listen. A group of men on the corner are arguing about Marcus Garvey's latest speech, voices rising with passion as they debate Africa and America and where black people truly belong. His message resonates with folks who've tried everything else, who've worked hard and played by the rules and still ended up nowhere. Back to Africa sounds like freedom to people who've never felt free anywhere. A woman sells fried fish from a cart, the smell of hot oil and cornmeal filling the air, and you're tempted even though you can't really afford it. She gives you a smile that suggests she knows your situation, that she's been there too, that maybe she'll give you an extra piece if you ask nicely. Children who should be in bed are still playing in the shadows, their laughter punctuating the night, and you wonder what kind of world they'll inherit, whether it'll be any kinder than the one you're navigating now. You climb the stairs to your apartment, each step creaking under your weight, and let yourself into the crowded rooms where your family is already settling in for the night. Someone's moved your pallet again, and you have to negotiate for sleeping space. But eventually, you find a spot and lie, down with your back against the wall and your coat draped over you like a blanket. The sounds of the tenement fill your ears. Conversations through thin walls, a baby crying somewhere above you, the distant thump of music from a party down the block, a couple arguing in rapid-fire voices that rise and fall like jazz improvisation. The ceiling has water stains that you've memorized, abstract shapes that look different every time you study them. You think about tomorrow, another day of work and worry, another day of being something less than fully human in the eyes of a city that needs your labor, but not your presence. You think about the South you left behind, the terror and the poverty, and the particular cruelty of a system designed to keep you in your place forever. You think about the family you lost along the way, the ones who didn't survive the journey north, the ones still stuck in Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi, writing letters about how they might join you someday. And you think about what you're building here. Despite everything, the community and the culture and the stubborn insistence on joy that no amount of hardship can extinguish. The Harlem Renaissance they'll write about in history books isn't happening in museums or universities. It's happening in this room, in rooms just like it all across the neighborhood, in the stories people tell and the songs they sing, and the way they carry themselves with dignity no matter what the world throws at them. You're part of it, even if you never publish a poem or play a note of jazz. Your survival is the foundation everything else is built on. Your presence is what makes the Renaissance possible. The thousands of ordinary black folks who migrated north carrying their dreams and their pain and their unshakable belief that somewhere, somehow, things could be better. You didn't come here to be a historical figure. You came here to live. And living in a world determined to make that difficult turns out to be its own kind of revolution. Tomorrow you'll wake up again in this overcrowded apartment, fight for the bathroom, eat whatever's available, ride the train downtown, work until your body aches, come home to this same neighborhood that's somehow both prison and sanctuary. You'll navigate the same dangers, face the same indignities, find the same small pleasures that make existence bearable. You'll listen to music that'll outlive everyone who created it. You'll eat food that carries the memory of places most people here are trying to forget. You'll speak a language that mixes southern roots with northern ambitions, that creates slang and poetry from the raw material of everyday survival. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll make it through. You'll raise children who have more choices than you did. You'll see Harlem transform from a promised land that fell short to something else entirely, carrying both the triumphs and traumas into whatever comes next. So no, you probably wouldn't last a day in 1920s Harlem. Not the real one anyway. The Harlem of history books and jazz albums and romanticized memory is easier to love from a distance. The actual neighborhood, with its tuberculosis and its tenements and its rent parties born from desperation, demands more than most modern visitors could give. It demands resilience forged in the fire of slavery and tempered by the relentless pressure of being black in America. It demands creativity that flourishes despite neglect, joy that persists despite sorrow, hope that survives despite evidence. The people who lived there weren't heroes in any conventional sense. They were just people doing what people do, trying to survive and maybe build something that outlasts them. And somehow, against every odd, they did exactly that. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your own bed, with your own bathroom down the hall, with heat that works and water that runs clean, you can spare a thought for those who came before, the ones who rode trains north carrying everything they owned in cardboard suitcases, the ones who squeezed into tenements that should have been condemned, the ones who worked jobs that crushed their bodies and still came home to dance at rent parties, because what else could they do? They built a world inside a world, a black metropolis in a white city, a renaissance in the middle of a ghetto. They gave America jazz and blues and poetry that still resonates a century later. And they did it all while being told every single day that they didn't matter. They proved that wrong in ways that echo through history. Their blood, their sweat, their impossible persistence, all of it stitched into the culture we inherited. So rest well tonight, and know that the music you love, the art you admire, the very language you speak, carries traces of people who survived what you couldn't imagine and created beauty that you'll never stop benefiting from. One crowded apartment, one rent party, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Mississippi, somewhere around 1852. The good news is the sun isn't up yet. The bad news is that's exactly why you're awake. A horn blasts through the darkness, a sound so sharp and unwelcome it cuts through whatever dream you were clinging to. There's no snooze button. There's no pretending you didn't hear it. That horn is the first commandment of your existence, and ignoring it carries consequences you've learned never to test. Your eyes open to absolute darkness. The cabin has no windows, or if it does, they're just gaps in the wood stuffed with rags to keep out the worst of the cold. The air is thick with the smell of bodies, smoke from last night's dying fire, and the earthen floor beneath you. You're lying on a pallet of corn husks and old fabric, maybe a thin blanket if you're fortunate, spread across wooden boards that dig into your spine no matter how you arrange yourself. Around you, others stir. This cabin holds anywhere from 6 to 12 people, depending on the size of your enslaver's operation and how much he values keeping families together, which is to say, not much. You might be sleeping beside your mother, your children, or strangers who arrived last month from a sale in New Orleans. The quarters are cramped not by accident, but by design. Space costs money. Your comfort costs nothing to the man who owns you. You sit up and immediately feel the cold. Even in the deep south, mornings before dawn carry a chill that seeps through the gaps in the walls and rises up from the packed dirt floor. Your clothes, if you can call them that, are a coarse Osnaburg shirt and trousers, a fabric so rough it might as well be woven from sandpaper and resentment. You've worn these same garments for months. The plantation issues clothing twice a year if you're lucky. Once if the harvest was poor, or the enslaver is feeling stingy, which is most of the time. The fabric chafes against your skin in places that never fully heal, and the seams are so crude they leave welts along your shoulders and under your arms. Your shoes, should you have any, are brogans, clunky, leather things with wooden soles that blister your feet until calluses form so thick you barely feel the ground anymore. Many in your cabin go barefoot year-round, their soles hardened into something almost inhuman, a small adaptation the body makes when the system offers nothing else. You stand, and every joint protests. You're 24 years old, but your body belongs to a much older person, someone who has spent years bent over cotton rows, hauling water, chopping wood, and absorbing punishments that leave marks on the inside as much as the outside. The ache in your lower back is constant now, a companion you've stopped noticing, except on mornings like this, when the cold makes everything sharper. Outside, the horn sounds again. The overseer is impatient. You have roughly 15 minutes to relieve yourself, splash water on your face if there's any to spare, and assemble in the yard for roll call. There's no bathroom, of course. There's a communal privy somewhere behind the cabins, a rough wooden structure over a pit that smells exactly like you'd expect. In the dark, you navigate by memory and by the sound of others doing the same. Privacy is a concept that belongs to white people. Here, in the quarters, you learn to perform the most basic human functions surrounded by others, and you learn not to think about it too hard. The water barrel near your cabin is nearly frozen on top. You break the thin ice with your knuckles and cup your hands to drink, then splash your face. The cold is shocking, almost painful, but it wakes you fully. That's the point. You need to be alert. Mistakes in the field aren't just embarrassing, they're dangerous. A moment's distraction, a row picked too slowly, a word spoken out of turn, any of these can bring the overseer's attention, and his attention always arrives attached to a whip. Roll call happens in the yard between the cabins and the main house, a space of packed earth where the enslaved gather each morning to be counted like inventory, which is exactly what you are. The overseer, a white man whose name you know but never speak aloud, walks down the line with a lantern, checking faces against his mental list. He's looking for anyone missing, anyone sick, anyone who might have run. The punishment for running is severe, not just for the person who fled, but sometimes for those left behind. Collective punishment keeps everyone invested in everyone else's obedience. It's efficient, in the way a machine is efficient. You stand straight, eyes forward, hands at your sides. You've learned how to hold your body to avoid drawing attention. Too slumped and you look lazy. Too proud and you look defiant. There's a posture somewhere in between that signals compliance without complete submission, and you've spent years finding it. The overseer passes you without comment, which is the best outcome. Being noticed is never good. After roll call, the field hands receive their assignments. Cotton is king here, and you are its subject. The fields stretch out beyond the tree line, hundreds of acres of white bolls waiting to be harvested. During picking season, which runs from late August through December, you'll spend every hour of daylight and some hours beyond bent double over the plants, fingers working through the bowls to extract the fiber without damaging it. The work is relentless. Each enslaved person has a daily quota, often measured in pounds of cotton picked. The quota varies by plantation and by the cruelty of the enslaver, but a common expectation is somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds per day. If you fail to meet your quota, you're whipped. 1 lash for every pound you fall short, in some cases. The mathematics of suffering, calculated down to the ounce. But here's the thing they don't tell you in the history books. Meeting your quota doesn't keep you safe. It raises it. If you pick 150 pounds today, the enslaver notes your capability. Tomorrow, your quota becomes 150. Next week, 175. The system is designed so you can never truly satisfy it. Your competence becomes your curse. The strongest, fastest workers are punished with escalating expectations until their bodies break down, at which point they're sold off or worked until they die. Excellence is not rewarded here. It's exploited. You file out toward the fields with the others, hoes and sacks distributed by a driver, an enslaved man given limited authority to manage the work gang in exchange for marginally better treatment. The driver occupies a complicated position. He's one of you, yet he enforces the rules that oppress you. Some drivers use their position to protect their people, slowing the pace when the overseer isn't watching, warning of dangers, shielding the weak. Others internalize the logic of the system and become as brutal as any white overseer. You've seen both kinds. You've learned to read them quickly because your survival depends on understanding who holds power and how they wield it. The walk to the fields takes 15 minutes. The sky is just beginning to lighten. A thin grey line along the eastern horizon. The air smells of dew, earth, and the faint sweetness of cotton plants. Under other circumstances, this might almost be beautiful, but you don't have the luxury of appreciating beauty. Your mind is already calculating. How much did you pick yesterday? How much will you need to pick today? Is the overseer in a foul mood? Did anyone get whipped last night? Every piece of information matters. Every detail could mean the difference between getting through the day intact or carrying fresh wounds back to your cabin. The cotton field swallows you whole. Row after row of plants stand chest high, their bowls split open to reveal the white fiber inside. From a distance, it looks almost peaceful, like snow scattered across a green sea. Up close, it's a battlefield. The cotton boll isn't soft when you're harvesting it. The dried husk around the fiber is sharp, with points that jab into your fingertips with every grab. By mid-morning, your hands are bleeding. By afternoon, the blood has dried and mixed with dirt and plant residue into a gritty paste that cracks when you flex your fingers. After a few weeks of picking, your fingertips are so calloused and scarred that you lose sensitivity entirely. Old hands in the quarters sometimes can't feel anything at all in their fingers, a numbness that spreads up through the palms. Your body adapts, but the adaptation itself is a kind of damage. You pick with both hands, working 2 rows at once, stuffing the cotton into a long sack that drags behind you and grows heavier with each passing hour. The sack can weigh 40, 50, 60 pounds by the end of the day, a burden you haul across uneven ground, while still bending, reaching, picking. The sun climbs higher. There's no shade in the cotton field. The hat on your head, if you have one, does little to block the Mississippi sun, which beats down with an intensity that seems personal. Sweat soaks through your clothes within the first hour and never dries. You drink water when the water carrier comes by, if they come by, which isn't guaranteed. Dehydration is common. Heat exhaustion is common. Collapse is common. When someone falls, the others keep working. You've learned that stopping to help only brings the overseer's attention to both of you. Noon arrives without ceremony. There's no lunch break in the formal sense, just a brief pause during the hottest hours when even the overseers recognize that working people to death in direct sunlight is counterproductive. You sit in whatever shade you can find, usually the shadow of your own body hunched over your knees, and eat what you brought. This is typically a piece of cornbread, maybe some cold bacon if you're fortunate, and water. The ration system on most plantations provides a set amount of food per week, usually a peck of cornmeal and a few pounds of salted pork. It's not enough. It's never enough. You supplement when you can by growing vegetables in the small garden plots some enslavers allow, by fishing or trapping when time permits, by quietly taking what you need and hoping no one notices. The cooking falls mostly to the women, who somehow find time between field labor and exhaustion to transform meager rations into something approaching a meal. They know which wild greens are safe to eat, how to stretch a piece of fatback into flavoring for a whole pot, how to make corn taste different enough day after day that you don't lose your mind from the monotony. This knowledge passes between generations like scripture, practical wisdom that keeps bodies alive when the system provides barely enough to survive. The diet is monotonous and nutritionally poor. Diseases related to vitamin deficiencies are rampant. Your teeth ache from lack of proper nutrients. Your gums bleed. You've seen children with bellies swollen from malnutrition while surrounded by fields producing wealth beyond imagining. The irony isn't lost on you. You grow cotton that becomes cloth, that becomes fine dresses for women who've never felt hunger. You pick the profits that build mansions you're not allowed to enter through the front door. Every bowl you harvest makes someone else rich, while you eat cornmeal and salt pork and try not to think too hard about the arrangement. The afternoon is the hardest part. The heat peaks around 2 or 3 o'clock, and your body, already exhausted from hours of labor, begins to rebel. Your vision swims. Your hands move slower despite your best efforts. The overseer notices everything. He rides on horseback between the rows, watching for anyone slacking, anyone falling behind. The whip coiled at his saddle isn't just decoration. You felt it. Most everyone here has felt it. The first time is shocking. Not just the pain, but the sound. A crack like a branch breaking followed by a line of fire across your back. After that, the threat of it becomes its own kind of presence, a constant weight pressing down on every decision you make. Should you stand up to stretch your back? He might see. Should you pause to pick a thorn from your palm? He might see. Should you help the elderly woman in the next row who's clearly struggling? He might see. And then you're both in trouble. The whip isn't the only punishment, of course. There are also the stocks, the paddling, the withheld food, the sail away from family. Each enslaver has preferences. Some are sadistically creative. Others outsource the cruelty to their overseers and maintain a fiction of gentility in the main house. The effect is the same. You live in a state of constant vigilance, your nervous system permanently tuned to threat, your body carrying tension in places you can't even name. As the sun finally begins to descend, you feel something almost like hope. Almost. Because the day isn't over when the sun sets. It's over when the horn sounds again. And that could be minutes or hours away, depending on the overseer's mood and the day's progress. When the horn finally comes, You straighten your back for the first time in hours, and the pain is exquisite. Your spine feels like it's been compressed into half its length. Your legs tremble. Your hands won't uncurl from the picking position. You gather your sack and join the line heading back toward the yard, where the day's work will be measured. This is the moment of judgment. One by one, each person's sack is weighed on a scale, and the number is recorded. The overseer stands by with a ledger and a whip. You watch the faces of those ahead of you, reading their outcomes in the set of their shoulders, the speed of their walk away from the scale. When it's your turn, you heave your sack onto the platform and wait. The number comes back. You've made your quota, barely. Relief floods through you, mixed with exhaustion so profound it feels like drowning. You collect your empty sack and walk back toward the quarters, your body moving on memory alone. The quarters are no refuge, but they're yours. This small collection of cabins, 12 by 12 feet at most, houses the only community you have. Here, in the hours between work and sleep, something resembling life happens. People cook over open fires, sharing what little they have. Conversations happen in low voices, always cautious, always aware that walls are thin and loyalties can be bought. But there's laughter here too, and singing, and stories passed down through generations. The culture that enslaved people built, even under these conditions, was and is remarkable. Spirituals that encoded messages of resistance, folk tales that mocked the powerful and celebrated the clever, kinship networks that stretched across plantations, maintained through secret meetings and whispered news. You weren't supposed to have a culture. You weren't supposed to be fully human. And yet here, it is, flourishing in the cracks, stubbornly alive. Your cabin smells of wood smoke, corn, and the particular scent of people who work hard and have limited means to wash. There's a fire going in the rudimentary hearth, more smoke than flame, but it provides light and some warmth as the evening cools. You eat your portion of the communal meal, cornmeal mush with whatever vegetables could be scrounged, and you sit with people who have become your family, whether or not you share blood. You talk about the day. You share information. Who's sick? Who's being watched? What the mood is in the main house. Every scrap of knowledge is currency here. Sunday is different. On most plantations, Sunday is the one day when field labor pauses, not out of kindness, but because even the most brutal enslaver recognizes that bodies need some rest to remain productive. The morning might still begin with religious services, often conducted by a white preacher who delivers sermons about obedience, about servants obeying their masters, about rewards waiting in the afterlife for those who suffer patiently now. You sit through these services with a face carefully blank, hearing the words but rejecting them in your heart. This isn't your faith. This is their faith dressed up to serve their purposes. Your faith happens later, in the quarters, when your own preachers speak of Moses and Pharaoh, of deliverance and justice, of a God who sees every lash and remembers every name. Sunday afternoon belongs to you, at least in theory. Some people tend their garden plots, growing the vegetables that supplement the starvation rations. Others visit family on neighboring plantations if they've managed to get a pass, those precious slips of paper that grant temporary permission to exist outside the bounds of the property. Some simply rest, lying in the shade or fishing in the creek, storing up whatever peace they can find against the week ahead. The children gather around the oldest woman in the quarters, a grandmother figure who survived longer than anyone thought possible. She tells stories, some from Africa passed down through oral tradition, some invented, some true accounts of resistance and escape dressed up as fables. The children listen with wide eyes, and you listen too, because these stories carry something essential. They remind you that you're part of something larger than this plantation, this state, this moment. Your people have a history that stretches back before the ships, before the chains, before any white man set foot on any of this land. The stories don't make the present easier, but they make it meaningful. They locate your suffering in a context that includes survival, resistance, and ultimately, the possibility of freedom. Freedom. You think about it more often than you'd admit. Everyone does. The underground network of information that runs through the enslaved community carries whispers about runaways who made it north, about conductors who help people disappear, about free states where a person can live without a master. Canada glimmers in the imagination like a fairy tale, too good to believe and too powerful to forget. But running is dangerous. The odds are terrible. Slave catchers, dogs, exposure, starvation. If you're caught, the punishment is biblical. Whipping, branding, sail to the deep south where conditions are even worse, if such a thing is imaginable. Some people try anyway. Some people decide that even death is preferable to this half-life. You've seen people leave in the night and never return, and you don't know if they made it, or if their bodies are rotting somewhere in a swamp. But you hold on to the hope that at least some of them found the other side. The threat of sail hangs over everything like weather you can't predict. Families here aren't protected by law. Your marriage isn't recognized. Your children aren't legally yours. At any moment, for any reason or no reason at all, the enslaver can decide to sell you, your spouse, your children, your parents. Maybe he needs money. Maybe he's punishing someone. Maybe he simply wants to. The auction block waits in every nearby town, a platform where human beings stand while strangers inspect their teeth and muscles and make bids. You've seen families torn apart, mothers screaming as children are dragged away, husbands watching helplessly as wives are loaded onto wagons heading south. The grief doesn't heal. It just becomes another scar carried invisibly. People learn to love cautiously here, knowing that every attachment is a vulnerability. And yet they love anyway, fiercely and fully, because the alternative is to become the hollow thing the system wants them to be. Love is its own resistance. Sleep comes hard and never lasts long. You lie down on your pallet as the fire dies, pulling your thin blanket over your body and trying to quiet your mind. But your body won't stop aching. Your hands throb. Your back seizes every time you shift position. And your mind keeps running through tomorrow, the next day, the endless procession of days that look exactly like this one. What keeps you going is hard to name. Partly it's sheer biological imperative, the animal drive to survive another day. Partly it's the connections you've built, the people who depend on you and whom you depend on. Partly it's spite, the determination not to give them the satisfaction of breaking you completely. And partly, buried deep, it's hope, not optimism, not expectation, just the stubborn refusal to believe that this is all there is. The spirituals talk about deliverance, about Jordan, about home. Some of that is about the afterlife, but some of it isn't. Some of it is code for freedom, for the North, for a future where your children's children will sleep in beds they own and wake to mornings that belong to them. You close your eyes and let the sounds of the cabin wash over you, the breathing of others, the creak of wood, the distant bark of dogs guarding the main house. Tomorrow, the horn will sound again. Tomorrow you'll rise before dawn and walk to the fields and bend over the cotton until your back screams. Tomorrow will look exactly like today, and the day after that, and the day after that. But tonight, in the dark, You allow yourself to imagine something different. You imagine walking north under stars that belong to no one, following the drinking gourd like the songs say. You imagine crossing a river into a place where your name is your own. The image is fragile, easily crushed by reality, but you hold it anyway. It's the most precious thing you possess. Morning comes faster than mercy. The horn tears through the darkness again, and you force your body vertical despite its protests. The routine begins anew, the same as yesterday, the same as it will be tomorrow, and every tomorrow until something changes. You splash water on your face, eat whatever's left from last night, assemble in the yard, and march toward the fields with the others. The cotton is still there, endless rows of it, white bowls gleaming in the early light. Your hands remember what to do even when your mind rebels. Pick, stuff, drag, repeat. Pick, stuff, drag, repeat. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic, a way to survive the hours by not fully inhabiting them. You float somewhere above your body, present enough to avoid mistakes, but detached enough to endure. The sun climbs, the heat builds, the overseer makes his rounds, and you keep picking, because the alternative is worse, because stopping isn't an option, because your body has been conscripted into a machine that runs on stolen labor and pain. Sometimes, in moments like this, you wonder how the world can contain this much cruelty and still function. You wonder how the men in the main house sleep at night, how they sit in church on Sundays and hear sermons about sin and salvation without their souls catching fire. You wonder if they know what they are, or if they've convinced themselves of some story that makes it all acceptable. Masters often claim their enslaved people are happy, that slavery is a benevolent institution, that they're providing civilization to savages. You've heard these justifications whispered and shouted, preached and published. They would be laughable if they weren't so deadly. The men who whip you also claim to be Christians. The women who profit from your labor also consider themselves ladies of refinement. The entire structure rests on a foundation of lies so massive it shapes the landscape itself, the law, the economy, the culture. You exist inside that lie, but you've never believed it. None of you have. The religion that enslaved people developed was something separate, something true. Yes, the masters forced Christianity on you, but you took it and transformed it into something they couldn't control. The God you pray to isn't the same God they invoke when they bless their meals and count their money. Your God sees. Your God remembers. Your God promises that the last shall be first, that the oppressors will face judgment, that freedom is coming even if you don't live to see it. The spirituals carry this theology in every note, songs of sorrow that are also songs of defiance. Go down, Moses, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. The masters think these songs are quaint, harmless expressions of primitive faith. They don't understand that every line is a declaration of resistance, every melody an assertion of humanity they're trying to deny. When you sing in the fields, quietly so the overseer doesn't notice, you're participating in an act of rebellion. Your voice is your own. Your faith is your own. Your inner life remains uncaptured no matter what they do to your body. This is the victory they can never touch, the part of you that stays free even in chains. The seasons turn, and the work shifts with them. Cotton picking gives way to processing as the harvest ends. Then comes clearing, ploughing, planting. The rhythm of agricultural labor follows the earth's cycles, and your body is tied to those cycles like a tool. Winter brings some relief from the heat, but replaces it with cold that the thin walls of your cabin can't keep out. Spring means longer days and back-breaking work preparing the fields. Summer is the endless chopping of weeds, keeping the cotton plants clear of competition. And then fall comes again, and the picking resumes, and the whole brutal carousel continues its rotation. Each season carries its own dangers, its own exhaustions, its own small opportunities for rest or resistance. You learn to navigate the calendar like a sailor reading the weather, anticipating what's coming and preparing as best you can. The years pass. Children are born into this system, arriving into bondage as naturally as drawing breath. Their futures already written in ledgers and wills. You watch them grow and wonder what world they'll inherit. Some will be sold away, dispersed to others, plantations like seeds scattered by wind. Some will stay and learn the same brutal rhythms you know. A few might find freedom through escape, through purchase, through the chaos of events not yet imaginable. You teach them what you can. How to survive without surrendering. How to hold on to themselves when everything conspires to strip them away. How to love in a system designed to make love a liability. And you pray that they'll see days you won't, that the world is moving towards something better, even if the movement is too slow to perceive. Resistance takes many forms, most of them invisible to the masters who think they know everything. There's the resistance of slowing down, of working just under the threshold of punishment, of conserving energy and strength for yourself instead of pouring it all into their profits. There's the resistance of feigning ignorance, playing the fool so they underestimate you, so they reveal information they shouldn't, so they give you space to maneuver. There's the resistance of sabotage, small acts of destruction that look like accidents, broken tools, sick animals, fires that start mysteriously. And there's the resistance of maintaining your humanity, your culture, your family bonds, your faith. Every song is resistance. Every story is resistance. Every moment of joy stolen from their system of misery is resistance. The masters call you lazy, stupid, childlike. They construct an entire ideology to explain why you deserve this treatment, why it's natural, why it's even good for you. But their explanations reveal their own anxiety. If enslaved people truly were the contented, inferior beings they're described as, why would so much violence be necessary to keep the system functioning? Why the whips, the chains, the patrols, the laws against literacy, the brutal punishments for the smallest infractions? The ferocity of the oppression is itself evidence that the masters know the truth. You are human. You are capable. You are dangerous. And they are afraid. Night falls again, and you return to the quarters with the others, your body a catalogue of complaints. The meal is sparse, the fire is smoky, the conversation is tired. But there's something happening tonight. A meeting, secret and dangerous, held in the woods beyond the cabins where the patrollers can't easily reach. Word spreads through glances and gestures, a language invisible to anyone outside the community. After midnight, when the main house goes dark and the overseers retreat to their beds, you slip out of your cabin and make your way through the trees. Others are already gathered, perhaps 24 people from this plantation and neighboring ones, connected by networks the masters don't know exist. There's a man speaking, someone with news from outside. The talk is of freedom, of the growing movement in the north to end slavery, of people who've made it out and are sending word back. The information is precious, dangerous, and absolutely forbidden. If you're caught here, the punishment will be severe, but you had to come. You had to hear it for yourself. The world outside this plantation is real, and it's changing. And someday, maybe soon, those changes will reach even here. The meeting ends before dawn. You make your way back to your cabin and lie down on your pallet for the few hours remaining before the horn sounds again. Your heart is racing with what you've heard. a mixture of fear and something you haven't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or something fiercer. The knowledge that history isn't finished, that the story isn't over, that what seems permanent can shift and shatter in ways no one predicts. You've lived your whole life inside a system that claims to be eternal, ordained by God and nature. But you've just been reminded that systems are made by people, and what people make, people can unmake. The horn will blow in an hour. Tomorrow will look like today. Your hands will bleed, your back will ache, and the overseer will watch for any sign of disobedience. But somewhere inside you, something has shifted. The exhaustion is still there, the fear is still there, but underneath them now burns a small and stubborn flame. You are not what they say you are. This place is not the end of the story. And someday, maybe not in your lifetime, but someday, the world will know what was done here and who survived it and how. You close your eyes. The darkness is absolute, and you wait for the sound that will begin another day, holding onto that flame like a promise, like a prayer, like the only thing they cannot take away. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, in your own room, with your own name and your own tomorrow stretching ahead of you unwritten, take a moment to sit with what you've heard. The people who endured this weren't historical abstractions. They were human beings with favorite foods and private jokes, and people they loved and dreams that kept them alive. They built families in a system designed to destroy families. They created culture under conditions meant to strip them of everything. They maintained hope when hope cost everything. They did this not because they were saints or heroes in some storybook sense, but because they were human, fully and fiercely human, and that humanity was something no law, no whip, no ledger could ever fully extinguish. What they endured matters. What they built matters. What they passed down through blood and memory and song still shapes the world we live in today. So as you drift towards sleep, warm and safe in ways they could only imagine, maybe let a little of that flame burn in you too. Not guilt, which helps no one, but recognition, remembrance, and maybe gratitude, not for suffering, but for survival, for the stubborn, impossible, beautiful fact that they made it through, enough of them, long enough, to make the future possible. Their tomorrow became your today, and what you do with it is the only thanks that matters. Congratulations, you've just enlisted in the United States Colored Troops. The year is 1863, and after months of debate, the government has finally decided that black men can serve in the army. Not because they suddenly believe in your equality, mind you. They're running out of white soldiers and the war isn't going well. You're a solution to a math problem, not a statement of principle. But you signed up anyway. Maybe you escaped slavery and want to fight for the freedom of those still in chains. Maybe you were born free in the North and feel the pull of duty. Maybe you just need the money. Whatever your reason, you're here now, standing in a recruitment office, while a white officer looks you up and down like he's inspecting livestock. Welcome to the Union Army. They need you. They just don't respect you yet. The enlistment process itself is an exercise in humiliation. You strip naked in front of strangers while a surgeon pokes and prods, checking your teeth like you're a horse at auction, measuring your chest, examining your feet. The examination feels uncomfortably familiar to men who escaped slavery. It's the same posture, the same vulnerability, the same reduction to a body being assessed for its usefulness. The doctor makes notes. He doesn't speak to you directly. He speaks about you to the recruiting officer, as if you're not standing right there shivering in the cold room. Fit for service, he might say, or sometimes rejected, and you're sent away without explanation. Your willingness to die for this country deemed insufficient because of a bad knee or poor eyesight. Those who pass receive their uniforms, often ill-fitting, previously worn by someone else, sometimes still carrying the stains of that previous owner's service. You don't complain. You're a soldier now. Complaining isn't part of the job description. The first thing you learn is that equality stops at the enlistment papers. You're a soldier now, technically, but you won't be treated like one. White privates earn $13 a month. You earn $10, and from that $10, the Army deducts $3 for your clothing allowance. White soldiers don't have that deduction. So while they're pocketing $13, you're taking home $7 for the same work, for the same risk, for the same war. The government's logic, if you can call it logic, is that you're more laborer than soldier. The Militia Act of 1862 set your pay at the rate for contraband laborers, not fighting men. Never mind that you'll be carrying the same rifle, facing the same bullets, dying in the same mud. On the books, you're worth less. And here's the cruel twist. Many of the men in your regiment refuse to accept any pay at all until the injustice is corrected. For over a year, soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts and other regiments go without a single dollar. Their families back home struggling to eat, all to make a point about dignity. The equal pay won't come until June 1864, and even then, only after protests, petitions, and the threat of mass resignation. You'll spend more than a year fighting for the right to be paid fairly for fighting. Your officers are white, every single one of them. The Army doesn't trust black men to lead, not even other black men. Some of these officers are genuinely committed to the cause, abolitionists who volunteered specifically to command colored troops because they believed in what this war could mean. Others took the commission because it came with a promotion they couldn't get elsewhere. And a few see commanding black soldiers as only slightly better than guarding a supply depot. You can tell which kind you have by how they look at you. The good ones learn your names, share your hardships, and fight alongside you when the bullets fly. The bad ones treat you like equipment that occasionally talks back. There's no path to promotion for you, by the way. No matter how bravely you fight, no matter how much you know, you will never pin an officer's insignia to your coat. A few men of exceptional talent eventually receive commissions, but they're so rare they're practically legends. For most of you, the highest rank you can achieve is sergeant. Leadership has a ceiling, and it's painted the color of your skin. The men in your regiment come from everywhere, and the differences between you are almost as striking as the similarities. Some escaped slavery just months ago, bearing scars on their backs and accents thick with the cadence of southern plantations. Others were born free in Philadelphia, Boston, or New York. Educated men who read newspapers and quote Shakespeare. The free-born men sometimes struggle to understand what their formerly enslaved comrades endured. The formerly enslaved sometimes resent the free-born for a privilege they never chose. But the Army doesn't care about these distinctions. To the officers, to the government, to the Confederates shooting at you, you're all just black soldiers. And so you learn to bridge those gaps around campfires, sharing stories of where you came from and what you're fighting for. The man who picked cotton in Georgia teaches the man from Boston how to read the land, how to sense weather changes, how to move quietly through brush. The man from Boston teaches the Georgian to read words on a page, to write letters home, to navigate the bureaucracy of Army life. You become brothers not because you started the same, but because you're ending up the same, in the same mud, facing the same bullets. Let's talk about what you actually do all day, because it's probably not what you imagined when you signed up to fight. You thought you'd be drilling with rifles, learning tactics, preparing for combat. Instead, You're digging, endless digging. Trenches, latrines, fortifications. Your hands are blistered and your back screams, and you haven't fired your weapon at anything except target practice. The army sees black soldiers as laborers first, fighters second. They assign you fatigue duty at rates that would make a white regiment revolt. While other units rest and train, you're hauling supplies, building roads, and doing the grueling manual work that keeps an army functioning. It's not that the work isn't important. It is. But it's the proportion that stings. You spend twice as many hours swinging a shovel as you do shouldering a rifle. Some commanders genuinely believe you're better suited for labor than combat. Others are simply protecting their white troops from the dirtiest jobs. Either way, you're exhausted before you ever see a battlefield. And when you finally do get the chance to fight, you'll have to prove something that white soldiers never had to prove, that you're capable of courage at all. The skepticism follows you everywhere. Before black soldiers ever fired a shot in combat, white newspapers debated whether you would run at the first sign of danger. Politicians questioned whether your race was capable of the discipline and bravery required for military service. Even some abolitionists wondered privately if arming black men was wise. You feel those doubts pressing on you like a physical weight. Every drill, every formation, every moment you're being watched and evaluated. Not as an individual soldier with strengths and weaknesses, but as a representative of your entire race. If you fail, they won't say you failed. They'll say black soldiers failed. That pressure never lifts. It's there when you wake up and there when you fall asleep, and there in every moment between. You have to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy, and even then, the goalposts shift. Training itself is a strange mixture of tedium and transformation. You learn to march in formation, to respond to drum signals, to load and fire your rifle in a sequence so practiced, it becomes automatic. Left foot, right foot, shoulder arms, present arms. The repetition drills military discipline into your bones. For men who escape slavery, there's something powerful about this transformation. You're no longer property. You're a soldier, part of something larger, trained to fight. The rifle in your hands is heavier than anything you've ever carried, and not just physically. It represents a fundamental shift in who you're allowed to be. Enslaved people caught with weapons faced death. Now you're being taught to use one by the government itself. Some nights, you just hold the rifle, feeling its weight, still not quite believing it's real. The food is terrible, but that's true for everyone in this war. Hardtack so old it could deflect bullets. Salt pork that's more salt than pork. Coffee made from grounds that have been reused until they're basically hot brown water. You chew your rations and try not to think about what's crawling in them. The weevils in your hardtack are extra protein, you tell yourself. At least you hope they are. But here's what's different for you. The supply chain that feeds black regiments is often slower, less reliable, and lower priority than the ones serving white troops. Your food arrives late. Your equipment is second-hand. The rifles they issue you are sometimes older models, the ones white regiments have already discarded for newer weapons. You make do because you have no choice. But every inferior tool, every delayed supply, every shortage that somehow only affects your regiment reminds you of where you stand in the army's priorities. Now let's discuss what happens if you're captured. This is the part that keeps you awake at night, staring at the canvas ceiling of your tent while the campfire pops outside. For white Union soldiers, capture means a prisoner of war camp. Miserable, yes, deadly often. But there's at least a pretense of military protocol, prisoner exchanges, the possibility of survival. For you, the rules are different. The Confederate government has made its position clear. Black soldiers captured in Union uniform will not be treated as prisoners of war. They will be treated as slaves in insurrection. That means execution on the spot or return to slavery, sometimes for men who were born free and have never been enslaved in their lives. Jefferson Davis himself signed an order declaring that black soldiers and their white officers would be handed over to state authorities for punishment. In practice, this meant whatever the capturing Confederate soldiers felt like doing, and what they felt like doing was often unspeakable. The white officers who command you face their own special danger. The Confederacy considers them criminals for leading black troops, race traitors deserving of harsher punishment than ordinary prisoners of war. Some captured officers of colored regiments were executed. Others were held in brutal conditions, singled out for abuse. The men who volunteer to lead you know this risk. The good ones accept it as the price of doing something meaningful. They understand that their fate is tied to yours now, for better or worse. When you see your colonel march at the front of a charge, you know he's not just leading soldiers. He's putting his life on a different kind of line than other officers face. That shared danger creates bonds that transcend the racial hierarchy the Army tries to maintain. The massacre at Fort Pillow haunts every black soldier who hears about it. April 1864. A Confederate force under Nathan Bedford Forrest attacks a Union garrison in Tennessee. About half the defenders are black soldiers from the 6th United States Colored Heavy Artillery and the 2nd United States Colored Light Artillery. When the fort falls, the killing doesn't stop. Confederate soldiers murder black troops who have already surrendered, shooting them, bayoneting them, burning some alive in their tents. The exact numbers are disputed, but what's not disputed is the disparity. Black soldiers died at far higher rates than white soldiers in the same battle, and many of those deaths came after resistance had ended. Survivors describe being hunted down, pleading for their lives, being killed anyway. The cry, "Remember Fort Pillow," becomes a rallying call in black regiments, fuel for fury and determination. But it's also a reminder of what awaits you if the battle goes badly. You don't just risk death in combat. You risk something worse than death if you're captured. Every time you march toward enemy lines, you carry that knowledge with you. Your fellow white soldiers have complicated feelings about your presence. Some are abolitionists who welcome you as brothers in the cause. They share their rations, teach you camp tricks, and treat you like fellow men. Others tolerate you with cold indifference, neither hostile nor friendly, simply uninterested in knowing you as anything other than another body in uniform. And some hate you. They didn't sign up to fight alongside black men. They came to preserve the Union, not to free slaves, and your presence in their army feels like a betrayal of what they thought they were fighting for. These men mutter insults as you pass. They start fights over nothing. They make it clear that even though you wear the same blue coat, you are not the same to them. You've learned to read the temperature of a camp quickly, to know which white soldiers are safe to approach and which ones carry a hostility that could turn violent after a few drinks. The Brotherhood of Arms has limits, and you know exactly where they are. Medical care in the Civil War is a horror show for everyone, but it's especially grim for black soldiers. The Army doesn't have enough surgeons to begin with, and the ones assigned to colored regiments are often the least experienced, the least qualified, or the least interested in being there. Some are dedicated physicians who do their best with limited resources. Others view their assignment as punishment and treat their patients accordingly. Hospital wards for black soldiers are frequently segregated, overcrowded, and underfunded. The mortality rate from disease, which kills far more soldiers than bullets in this war, is higher in black regiments than white ones. Part of this is the labor you're assigned. All that digging, all that fatigue duty, wears down your body and makes you more susceptible to illness. Part of it is the conditions you're given. Tents that leak, blankets that don't arrive, camps pitched in swampy ground that breeds mosquitoes and fever. And part of it is simply that your life is valued less. When resources are scarce, and they're always scarce, guess which regiments get shorted first? You lie awake some nights thinking about home, about the people you left behind. If you escape slavery to join the army, you wonder about families still in bondage. Are they safe? Will this war free them? Will you live long enough to see it happen? The not knowing is its own kind of torture. You might have a wife still on a plantation in Virginia, children you haven't seen in years, a mother who doesn't know if you're alive or dead. The war could free them, or it could get them killed as punishment for your escape. You have no way of finding out. Letters can't reach them. News doesn't travel. You just have to hope and keep fighting. If you were born free in a northern city, you think about the mother who cried when you enlisted, the father who was proud but terrified, the siblings who looked at you like you were already a ghost. Letters are precious things in army camps. They arrive weeks after they were written, crumpled and dirt-stained, but they might as well be made of gold. You read them over and over until you've memorized every word. But writing back is its own challenge. Many soldiers in the colored troops never learned to read or write. Slavery didn't encourage literacy, to put it mildly. So they dictate letters to comrades who can write, or to chaplains who serve that function. Their most intimate thoughts filtered through another man's hand. The letters that survived from Black Civil War soldiers are some of the most moving documents of the era, filled with love, longing, and a desperate hope that their sacrifice will mean something. Let's talk about your first real battle, the moment when all the drilling and digging and waiting finally becomes the chaos you signed up for. Your heart hammers so hard you can feel it in your teeth. Your hands are slick with sweat on your rifle. The man next to you is praying under his breath, the same words over and over, a rhythm to keep the fear at bay. The officers are shouting, the drums are beating, and somewhere ahead of you is a line of men who want to kill you. Not just because you're wearing Union blue, because of what you are, because your very presence on this battlefield is an affront to everything they're fighting to preserve. That knowledge sits in your stomach like a stone. You're not just a soldier to them, you're a symbol, and symbols attract special hatred. The command comes, you move forward. The noise is indescribable, a roar that seems to come from everywhere at once, rifles cracking, cannons thundering, men screaming. You can't see much through the smoke. You just follow the man in front of you and try not to trip over the bodies that start appearing in the grass. The assault on Fort Wagner in July 1863 becomes the most famous engagement of black soldiers in the war, though famous might not be the right word. The 54th Massachusetts leads the charge against a heavily fortified Confederate position on the South Carolina coast. They know it's going to be brutal. The approach is a narrow strip of beach. The fort is ringed with ditches and walls, and Confederate guns have clear fields of fire. It's practically suicidal. But the 54th's commander, Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a white abolitionist from a wealthy Boston family, believes his men need this chance to prove themselves in combat. And the men themselves want it. They're tired of being told they can't fight, won't fight, shouldn't fight. They want to show what they're made of. So they charge into the teeth of the Confederate defenses at dusk, scrambling up the sandy slope while bullets tear through their ranks. Shaw falls. On the parapet, killed almost immediately. The assault fails. Nearly half the regiment is killed, wounded, or captured. The Confederates bury Shaw in a mass grave with his black soldiers, intending it as an insult. His family says leave him there. He would have wanted it. The Battle of the Crater in July 1864 becomes another bloody lesson in how the Army uses and discards black soldiers. Union engineers dig a tunnel under Confederate lines at Petersburg and pack it with explosives. The plan is to blow a hole in the enemy defenses and send troops pouring through. Originally, black soldiers of the 4th Division are trained specifically for this assault. They rehearse for weeks, learning how to navigate the crater and fan out on either side. But at the last minute, the commanding general gets cold feet. He worries that if the attack fails and black soldiers die in large numbers, he'll be accused of using them as cannon fodder. So he sends in untrained white divisions first. The attack becomes a disaster. White troops pour into the crater but don't know what to do next. They mill around in confusion while Confederates regroup and begin firing down into the pit. When black soldiers are finally sent in, they're advancing into a slaughter. Confederate troops show them no mercy. Survivors describe rebels shouting that they would give no quarter to black soldiers, shooting men who tried to surrender. The battle becomes a massacre, and afterward, everyone blames everyone else. The black soldiers who were prepared for this mission never got to execute it properly. Instead, they were thrown in as reinforcements to a doomed assault and died for someone else's failure. The aftermath of a battle is its own particular hell. You're still alive somehow. Your ears are ringing so loudly you can barely hear the groans of the wounded around you. Your uniform is soaked with sweat and other things you don't want to identify. The ground is carpeted with bodies, some in blue, some in grey, some still moving, most not. You help carry the wounded to the field hospital, which is really just a tent where overwhelmed surgeons work by lantern light, their aprons dark with blood. The smell is something you'll never forget, a combination of gunpowder, copper, and that particular sweetness of wounds going bad. You see things that will visit you in dreams for the rest of your life. Men missing limbs, men missing faces, men calling for their mothers in voices that don't sound human anymore. And when the burial details go out, you notice something. Confederate dead are often buried with more care than Union-colored troops. Even in death, the hierarchy persists. Camp life between battles is a strange limbo of boredom, exhaustion, and anxiety. You drill, you dig. You wait for orders that may never come or may come tomorrow. You play cards with men whose faces have become more familiar than your own families. You sing songs around the campfire, spirituals that carry generations, of sorrow and hope, secular songs that mock your situation with dark humor. You listen to the sergeants who've been in the army longer, tell stories about engagements they've survived, lessons wrapped in anecdotes about men who made fatal mistakes. You learn to sleep through almost anything, to grab rest whenever it's offered, because you never know when you'll get the chance again. The rhythm of army life becomes its own kind of normalcy. Even though nothing about your situation is normal, you're a black man in a country that still can't decide if you're property or person, wearing the uniform of an army that still can't decide if you're soldier or laborer, fighting for a government that still can't decide if you deserve equality. And yet here you are, doing the work anyway. Nighttime in camp brings its own texture. The fires burn low. Sentries pace the perimeter, their footsteps crunching on leaves or squelching in mud, depending on the season. Men huddle under thin blankets, pressed, together for warmth, their breath fogging in the cold air. You hear coughing from the sick tents, the distant whinny of horses, the occasional bark of an officer's dog, and underneath it all, the quiet conversations of men who can't sleep. They talk about home, about women they left behind, about what they'll do when the war ends. Some talk about buying land, starting businesses, living like free men in a free country. Others are more cynical. They've seen too much already to believe the country will change just because they bled for it. The optimists and the pessimists argue in hushed voices while the stars wheel overhead, both knowing that tomorrow might bring orders that make all their plans irrelevant. The Emancipation Proclamation changed everything and nothing. It declared slaves in Confederate territories free, which was wonderful in principle, except the Confederacy didn't exactly take orders from Abraham Lincoln. For slaves still behind enemy lines, freedom remained, theoretical until Union troops actually arrived to enforce it. But for you, the proclamation matters in a different way. It transformed the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a fight to end slavery. It gave your service meaning beyond military necessity. You're not just filling a gap in the ranks anymore. You're fighting for something that will change the country forever. At least, that's how you see it. Not everyone in the Union Army agrees. Some white soldiers resent the shift in war aims. They didn't sign up for abolition. They signed up to put down a rebellion. And now they're being told they're fighting to free people they've been taught their whole lives to look down upon. The grumbling in some white regiments is loud enough to hear from your side of camp. Let's talk about the strange experience of liberating enslaved people as you march through Confederate territory. Your regiment enters a plantation, and the enslaved people there see you, a black man in Union blue, carrying a rifle. The looks on their faces are something you'll carry with you forever. Disbelief first, then a dawning hope that transforms into joy so overwhelming some of them weep and fall to their knees. They touch your uniform like it's sacred. They ask your name, where you're from, if freedom is real now, or just another broken promise. Old women bless you. Children follow the column for miles, not wanting to let you out of their sight. It's the most meaningful thing you've ever done, and it fuels you through every indignity the army throws at you. But there's complexity too. Some of these people are your family, scattered by the slave trade years ago. Some speak with accents that match your grandmother's voice. The war has made you an instrument of liberation, but it's also shown you the full scope of what slavery did. Families torn apart, bodies scarred by the lash, spirits that flicker between defiance and brokenness. You free them because you can, but freedom is just the beginning of a longer journey. The contraband camps that spring up near Union lines are filled with people who escaped slavery seeking protection. Women, children, elderly people who couldn't fight but refused to stay in bondage. They cluster around the army like refugees, which is exactly what they are. The army doesn't quite know what to do with them. Some commanders put them to work, paying meager wages for labor. Others try to push them away, seeing them as a burden. The conditions in these camps are often terrible, crowded and unsanitary, breeding grounds for disease. You see children die of illnesses that proper food and shelter might have prevented. You see women who escaped one form of exploitation fall victim to another at the hands of Union soldiers who see them as fair game. The freedom your army brings is real, but it's also incomplete, messy, full of suffering that nobody planned for. You do what you can. You share your rations. You protect who you're able to protect. But you're just one soldier, and the need is overwhelming. The Confederate response to black soldiers in Union blue grows more vicious as the war progresses. They see your presence as an insult, an inversion of the natural order they're fighting to preserve. propaganda describes you as savages, beasts, subhuman creatures who will commit atrocities if not stopped. The reality is that black regiments generally behave with the same discipline as any other troops, sometimes more so because you know how closely you're being watched. But reality doesn't matter to men who've built their entire society on the premise of your inferiority. They can't afford to see you as soldiers. They can only see you as threats to everything they believe. This ideology fuels the massacres, the refusal to take prisoners, the special hatred reserved for black men in blue. You're not just an enemy combatant. You're an existential challenge to their worldview, and they'd rather kill you than let that challenge stand. Summer heat and winter cold both find ways to make camp life miserable. In the swampy lowlands of the South Carolina coast, where many black regiments serve, the heat is suffocating and the mosquitoes are thick enough to drink. Malaria sweeps through camps like wildfire. Men shiver with fevers one day and sweat through soaked shirts the next. The medical staff does what they can, which isn't much. Quinine helps if you can get it, but supplies are inconsistent. You lose men to disease who never saw a Confederate soldier, never fired their rifle in anger, just wasted away in their cots while the swamp breathed fever into the air. In winter, it's exposure and pneumonia, tents that don't hold heat, blankets that arrive weeks late or not at all, firewood rationed because supply trains prioritize ammunition. You learn to layer everything you own, to sleep pressed against your bunkmates for warmth, to stomp your feet constantly to keep blood flowing. The war doesn't pause for weather, neither does your suffering. Religion sustains many soldiers in the colored troops. Chaplains hold services that become part of the regiment's rhythm. Moments of peace amid the chaos. The songs you sing carry weight that only those who've lived under slavery can fully understand, melodies passed down through generations, encoded with messages of hope and resistance. When you sing about crossing Jordan, about laying down your burdens, about meeting on the other side, the words mean something specific. This is the theology of the oppressed, faith forged in suffering and refined by the hope that suffering isn't the final word. Not every soldier is devout, of course. Some have lost whatever faith they once had, ground down by the brutality of what they've witnessed. But even the skeptics often quiet down during services, respecting the comfort it brings to their brothers. In an army, where you're constantly reminded of your lesser status, church is one place where everyone is equal before, something greater than military rank. By the war's end, nearly 180,000 black men have served in the Union Army. They've fought in over 400 engagements. They've proven their courage so definitively that even skeptics have been forced to acknowledge it. 25 black soldiers and sailors received the Medal of Honor. The arguments that black men couldn't fight, wouldn't fight, lacked the intelligence or discipline for military service, have been demolished by evidence written in blood. You survived, let's say. Many didn't. 1 in 5 black soldiers died during the war, a rate significantly higher than white troops. Most of those deaths came from disease, not combat, a grim testament to the conditions you were forced to endure. But you made it. The war is over. The Confederacy is defeated. Slavery is abolished. Everything you fought for has been achieved. Except it hasn't, not really. You return home to a country that still doesn't know what to do with you. The gratitude for your service evaporates quickly. Within a few years, the promises of reconstruction begin to crumble. The vote you were given is stolen back through violence and legal trickery. The equality you fought for retreats behind new walls of segregation. Black veterans are targeted by terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, precisely because you proved something dangerous, that black men could fight and win. That knowledge threatens the old order, and the old order fights back with night rides and burning crosses and strange fruit hanging from southern trees. The pension you were promised arrives late, arrives reduced, arrives with bureaucratic obstacles designed to discourage you from claiming it. The country you saved struggles to remember your contribution, rewrites the war as a noble conflict between brothers rather than a battle over human bondage. By the time your grandchildren learn about the Civil War, your story will be a footnote if it's mentioned at all. You grow old in a country that prefers to forget you. The reunions of white veterans become national events, celebrated and honored. The reunions of black veterans are smaller, quieter, often ignored by the press. When monuments go up on battlefields, they commemorate white regiments. The colored troops who bled on the same ground are rendered invisible, their sacrifice erased from the marble and bronze that's supposed to remember the war. You watch former Confederates regain political power. Watch the freedoms you fought for stripped away one by one. Watch a new system of oppression rise from the ashes of the old one. The hope you carried through those years of war, the belief that your service would change things, curdles into something more complicated. You're proud of what you did. You have to be. But you're also angry and tired and wondering if any of it mattered. But you know what you did. You know the weight of that rifle in your hands, the terror of that charge, the joy on the faces of the people you liberated. You know the names of the men who died beside you, friends whose faces visit your dreams decades later. You know that you fought twice, once against the Confederacy and once against the Union's own reluctance to treat you as fully human. You won both battles in their way, not completely, not permanently. The work you started would take another century to continue, and it's not finished yet. But you proved something that could never be unproved, that when given the chance, you fought with everything you had for a country that gave you almost nothing in return. And somehow, against all odds, you survived to tell the story. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, safe and warm and far removed from the mud and blood of a war that ended long ago, maybe spare a thought for those soldiers. The men who signed up knowing the pay was unfair, the danger was doubled, and the recognition might never come. They did it anyway. They grabbed that chance to fight for something greater than themselves, even when the country they were saving couldn't see their full humanity. Their names are mostly lost now, scattered in pension records and cemetery rolls, but their legacy shaped everything that came after. Every step toward equality that followed stands on the foundation they built with courage, sacrifice, and a stubborn refusal to accept that their lives were worth less. They were soldiers. They deserved to be remembered as such.